Today we're going to do something a little different and chat about the ring in Dark and Darker. Also called the Death Swarm, this mechanic has been sometimes criticized for rushing players through the dungeon and not leaving enough time for players to loot after a fight. Today, I want to argue that this is by design. So here's 10 reasons why I see the Death Swarm as a core mechanic in Dark and Darker, and why I don't think it's going to change significantly. Number 1, interaction speed. The fact that interaction speed is a thing, the fact that it's a pro or a con for a number of different classes, points to the idea that speed should matter. Whether it's activating portals, opening doors, using bandages, setting up campfires, or looting chests, interaction speed will help you move through the dungeon more efficiently. If you had unlimited time, the relevance of this stat would be diminished. Number 2, looting. There is treasure lying around in all sorts of places in the dungeon. Some of it is easily accessible, and some of it is a little off the beaten path. There are a few jumping puzzles that can lead to some great loot, but having a time limit means that you need to secure the area, complete the jumps, and loot quickly so you don't get overtaken by the swarm. And while it would be nice to have better visual cues as to the quality of loot on dead players, in the game's current iteration, this provides another way for experienced players to take advantage of their game knowledge to gain an advantage. Limiting player time in the dungeon limits the amount and quality of loot players can take out. So, in another sense, time is money. Next, PvE. While deadly to new players, the monsters in the dungeon can be seen as kind of like a speed bump. You can approach them carefully and get by without much consequence, but if you're speeding, or fighting other players, they can be a problem. The design is also reinforced by the nature of the circle. By limiting the player's time they have to clear out the various modules, the PvE becomes more of a challenge. And once again, this provides interesting choices for the player. Do they want to bring in a party with lots of range options to play really carefully and take out monsters without taking any damage, albeit slightly slower? Do they want to bring in a traditional trinity with a tank, a healer, and a damage class and try to tank and move a little bit quicker through the dungeon? Or do they have a completely different strategy in mind? Maybe no healer. Maybe they just want to stack damage and kill things as fast as possible. Number 4, healing. There is a reason clerics don't get spell meditation. Healing is meant to have a cost. By forcing characters to move quickly, it creates some interesting choices for the player. The ring does damage, but it's only deadly at the very end. Players can opt to spend a little bit more money in the form of healing items to play through the Death Swarm, which in turn can net more treasure by clearing out more of the rooms. So in a sense, players can exchange health and time for money. Campfires. Campfires do a good job of reinforcing the relationship between time, money, and healing. This is an item that has a cost. It takes significant time to use, but it has the potential to provide amazing resource recovery. Deciding when and where to use a campfire also creates interesting choices for players. Number 6. Meditation. Like campfires, meditation allows wizards to spend a little time in order to regain resources. The design philosophy here is that a wizard has a small pool of very powerful abilities, and can choose to spend this resource to move through the dungeon more quickly. For example, by quickly clearing out a room of mobs with magic missiles and fireballs. Good wizards know how to balance using their spells to clear out monsters, while still being ready for the inevitable PvP battle. Once again, allowing an opportunity for knowledge and skill to have more of an impact on the game. Number 7. PvP. Most people are familiar with the Circle or the Death Swarm from Battle Royale games. The idea is that as players are eliminated from the round, the play area gets smaller so that groups are forced into engagements. And this holds true with Dark and Darker. As the match progresses, players need to decide between pushing towards the center, the safe zone, or playing the ring. The addition of PvE mobs and looting means that there's a cost between just trying to position yourself more effectively for PvP versus trying to get the most loot you can out of the dungeon. Number 8. Portals. Limiting the number of escapes and spreading them out throughout the dungeon means that players are forced to decide if they want to prioritize getting out with what they have or if they want to risk it for more reward. The fact that triple blue portals were removed when the triple red portals remain also reinforces the idea that this is meant to be a hard choice. Sometimes the ring will close in such a way that a team might only have access to a few guaranteed escapes. Do they all want to go down together? Do they want to split the party, have a few escape, and hope the next can find a new blue? Do they load up all the best loot on one player and send them out while the rest try their hand in the depths of hell? These are all interesting decisions to make, and adding a time limit forces players to make a decision quickly. Number 9. Map design. The modular design of the map also makes the ring an interesting addition. This is another way to add a little variety to the game while also designing the combat arenas intentionally. Because the circle tends to close towards the center modules, Iron Mace can select which modules are more likely to be in the closing rings. But there is still a little bit of variety across games in terms of how each dungeon plays out as the circle closes. And number 10. As a final point, I want to point to Terence specifically as a developer at Iron Mace. In some of the Q&As, he's mentioned offhandedly that he's often the one pushing for shorter and shorter times for the ring. This might make sense from his perspective. As someone who's very familiar with the game becomes easier the more knowledge you have. And as players become more familiar, the time limit imposed by the ring becomes less and less of a restriction because players are making better choices and fewer mistakes. And for new players, the ring can seem like a really poor design choice and a really huge challenge in terms of learning the game. But this is by design. Obviously, the game is still in its infancy, and we know the developers are willing to make adjustments and even walk back on some of their design choices. For example, the Goblin Caves, adding a solo dungeon to Dark and Darker. However, the ring does really feel like a core design element, and I don't think it's going to change anytime soon. If you're watching this, it's because you're passionate about Dark and Darker. Not everyone is going to agree on what the best direction for the game is, and it's reasonable to give suggestions and feedback for the developers during a playtest. Still, I think the ring is here to stay, and I trust Iron Mace's vision with it so far. Thanks for watching.